2 Timothy chapter 1, and I'm starting at verse 5. It says, I remember your genuine faith, for you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And I know that the same faith continues strong in you. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. As you're taking your seats today, help me introduce the title for today's message. Everyone say, A Past to Remember. You may take your seats. A Past to Remember. We are currently in the series for this month called A Conjunction God. Last week we played the Schoolhouse Rock video, A Conjunction Junction, What's Your Function? It was intended to remind us of just how amazing these conjunctions are, but even more so of the God that utilizes them in our lives. Today, we come to another space where we see a beautiful conjunction that gives us hope and that strengthens us in our challenges. But before I rush to the conjunction, it seems only right to build the space that it sits in. Now, the scripture sits in a very particular passage and a very particular place. It is in a letter that we have Paul writing to Timothy, but I believe it sits on similar ground that we may be experiencing even now. In my current celebration of Black history, I've been intrigued about how we choose to remember history. How do we retell stories of the past? And in what ways do they inform our present and guide our future? I'm asking myself because I want to figure out what things should I personally be doing to further my education, my understanding, especially of the contributions of African Americans in the States, that will help recast how I see current struggles and issues. Many of you may know that there have been 44 states in our country who have issued or at least put forward legislation to limit the type of Black history or American history that can be told. Now, there are a number of states to which those legislations have been pushed down, some that are still on the floor to determine, but some of the main spaces that are being pushed against are ways by which we think about racism, sexism, not just being the product of individuals, but how they may have found housing in structures and institutions. Much of the big pushback is that we don't want to teach our American children who may not be of Native American or Latino or African American descent that there's something wrong with them. We don't want them to feel the guilt that a country with its history may burden. And it seems amazingly odd to me. Odd is not the right word. It seems infuriating to me that instead of telling a fuller picture of history, for concerns of the ways that this might inform a group of children, we tell a different history that informs a different group of children about who they are. That even in our Black history communications, we constantly tell Black kids that you started slavery. We constantly tell children of African ancestry that your beginnings are chains. But we're not worried that that might affect the way a child might see him or herself. I'm really confused with how we choose to tell stories because of how this informs not only what was, but what is. Because if I don't tell a fuller picture, I can better justify the benefits that some people currently live with that we know it is unjustifiable to continue to hold if we tell a more realistic picture. I'm infuriated. And I'm infuriated not just at those states, but even at the ways by which I have informed that same retelling. That when we think of where we've come from, how we connect to it, that the brokenness in our ability to tell the story has been used as a way to limit our present and our future. And this is not just a Black story. This is an American story. And I hope that we in this moment, as we try to retell history, we can really look at this because we've told so many things partially that have allowed us to miss or intentionally eliminate the truthfulness that should be there. And I understand it. Like, I get angry. Sometimes in Black History Month, I get tired of watching the same shows. I don't want to keep hearing about the same individuals, and I don't want to keep thinking about the hurt of slavery and being angry and frustrated and having to watch my interaction with other groups because I'm not sure where I am on that particular day and how somebody might say something that day that might trigger me because I just got finished watching the same story over and over again. Can I just be honest? So then I stop watching altogether. And then I become even more complicit, as if that is the only part of the story, because we don't tell the story in the way that I think it should be told. We tell it as if we've always just been here in struggle and pain, and never as if that pain had turned into power and perseverance. We don't tell it that way. We don't tell it that the reason why we're still here is because our ancestors chose not to leave. When Abraham Lincoln came and said, "This is what I'll do. I'll set you free if you can tell me that you'll leave once I free you. And I can sell that to other whites in the country and that'll be okay." And our forefathers said, "No, because our blood is in these grounds. Our blood is in these fields. And this is just as much my country as it is your country. How dare you say we leave?" You can leave. So maybe there's a reason why we are still here. And maybe that even informs how we should be moving forward, even in these rough and scary times. I recognize that there's sometimes I don't even watch the news because I don't want to know how scary it really is. Let's be honest. We sit in a church today that has security. Not because I'm some big preacher that folks are trying to come and rob us, but because we know that they persist in a country to do harm to minorities and especially larger groups of them. Thus, we must employ security just to be able to worship. But we don't want to tell a full picture of history. We sit in this place and I'm blown away by how we choose to tell the story. And I want to reclaim it. Because the story isn't beautiful, it isn't pristine, but that's what makes it beautiful. And the truth is, the story even that has lived within the black church isn't all that pristine and beautiful, especially in the ways that we've dealt with women. I'm coming to call us to carpet because if we don't, we may never be made better for it. And that's why this text seems so mind-blowing to me, because Paul, now writing from chains, writing to a young man in ministry, is recognizing that people are leaving the faith in droves. He's writing about, in fact, if you keep reading verse 15, he says, all of Asia Minor just walked away. They don't believe the faith no more. They don't believe it because surely it can't be real if one of its main leaders is now arrested, sitting in chains, looking powerless. Not to remember that we didn't start this faith until there was a man that was put in chains and made to look powerless, but I digress. They're worried about it, and Paul, now writing to his young protege, doesn't want him to give up. He doesn't want him to see the environment that he's growing up in and the environment that he's called to lead the church in, and for himself to be messed up. So he calls upon him to remember. He says, I remember your genuine faith. And watch this. Your genuine faith didn't come from daddy and granddaddy. It came from grandmama and mama. Grandmama Lois and Mama Eunice. And this is the same man that is often used to talk about women's quietness or women's inability within church, that Paul himself, even while in chains, could not help but recognize that there was some power of faith transmitted for church leaders from women. I want you to hear it. Because there's a history that has happened even within black church circles that have done the same thing that American history has done by trying to white out certain people's influences and presence, as if the black church has not always been moved by black women. And I want to say it. Thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your gift to us, that we would not be here had it not been. In fact, many of you, if I was to ask, you can roll the Rolodex and you know that you can call out the women of faith that you've seen in your life that fueled and fed you. And that doesn't mean that there's no space for men and there aren't men, but this is to a group that has often told to sit on the sides. You can't be a minister, but you can teach Sunday school. I still don't understand how the two ain't that much different. You can be a Sunday school teacher, you can direct Sunday school, you can teach men in Sunday school, but don't you dare open your mouth and say you got a call to ministry. That was a history. He says, I want you to remember, in this most difficult time, remember your faith. And this faith was handed down for now 3 generations. Even though it's new, it's handed down through multiple generations. Paul recognizes that there's importance in us handing down the faith through generations. And I want to lift that up in a congregation that is multi-generational. Because as I stand before many of you and have to funeralize generation after generation, as I stand up over and over again, and for some of you, you remember you lived your life with these people, and now they're gone. There's a generation of our church that is hurting because every death signals that their time may be coming. And your pastor sees you. Even though I'm not at that life stage, even though I don't know what that feeling feels like, I see it. But I also recognize that if we don't get from you what you have now, it will forever be lost. So every time we come and we do certain things, it's intentional so that we don't forget. We sing hymns not because hymns are the in vogue thing, but because they connect us to a history that we can't afford to lose. But don't get mad then when we don't always do hymns, because we got a whole nother generation that has no connection to them. But we have to move it forward. Paul's writing, he says, don't forget grandmama. Don't forget granddaddy. Mama. Don't forget the ideas that they have. In fact, remember their faith. And I can't help but think that Paul was kind of connecting to something that I think, those of African descent should know very well. He's almost speaking in word pictures. Because faith is not a thing. Like, draw a picture of faith. How would you do it? You wouldn't be able to rightly draw the picture of faith except you draw the actions of the faithful person. So when Paul calls them now to remember the faith of his mother and grandmother, he's calling him to remember the action, the images, and the understanding that they will walk with. Remember when you will find them singing. Remember how they dealt with disappointment. Remember how they persevered when others walked away. Remember what that looked like. That becomes your image now of faith. He says, remember that. But then he says something else. He says, as you remember this stuff, as we think about the past, as you remember the gift that they are to you, he also says, so now you need to fan into flames the very gifting that has been given to you. Paul, sitting in chains, watching people walk away from the faith, recognizes that the church and the faith dies if the new generation does not begin to walk into its own calling and gifting. If the fire got started, but we never feed it, the fire dies. I think there are so many of us that we saw the fire start, but we didn't put anything into it. And then we're getting into those places of faith where we feel like the fire is low, and we wonder why it just feels harder and more difficult to warm things up. It's harder for me to walk into service and get warmed up. It's harder for me to go through life and deal with the challenges because the flame is kind of low. I'm starting to think that the problem is with the faith as opposed to the fire that should be enlivening the faith. So since I don't do anything with it, then it begins to die. Because we have picked up a faith that we really think is consumeristic. We want the faith that is already perfectly put together, that puts no work on us. That I could walk in, purchase, and say, oh yeah, give me that faith. Put that on, and now I can be a huge pillar of faith in my community. As opposed to having to work through the things that it takes to build faith so that the flame continues to grow, because now we can rightly hold to the faith that we believe. This is now a clarion call. Paul, in chains, recognizes it can't be my faith right now. It can't be my teaching right now. It can't be my gifts right now. If it is not for you, who God has placed you in the positions that he has placed you, if it is not for you, the ones that are out there that are given the gifts that God has given you, if it is not for you, the flame will die. So we sit in this place between remembering the past, grabbing the traditions, moving them forward, and then calling the gifts out. Calling you to maneuver in your own gifting that God has provided. Because if you don't, the flame dies. I know it. And I'll just say this. Showing up Sunday morning is not enough to fan the flame. Listen, I really wish my preaching was that good. I wish that my gifting was so good that you can come one time a week, once a month, and I just preach and you like, whoosh, I'm back on fire again. I can walk out there and take on the world. That's just not how it works. Every single week I show up, I'm using my gift to fan it so that your gift can be reignited. But that means you need to be using your gift so that then my gift can be reignited. And then all of a sudden our church is stronger and we go out there to do the work that God has called for us to do. You do know Sunday morning is not the work we were called to. Oh, you missed it. I get it. We think God called us to Sunday morning worship. So we come to Sunday morning worship and we act like this is it. This ain't it. This is the recharge. This is your plug-in. This is like all of you that got electric cars, you plug it up at night so that what? You can unplug it in the morning and drive it to work, to go into the places that you need to go. Well, every Sunday when you show up here, this is God plugging you up, energizing you. So now you can go out there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday again to do the work of the church. This is just the assembly. This is the pep rally. This is me calling the huddle. Hey guys, y'all getting ready for the play? Let's get ready to call it out. It's Super Bowl Sunday. Y'all would lose your mind if Mahomes said all day, all right guys, the whole game, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna stay right here in the huddle. We ain't never gonna take the field. We ain't never gonna run the ball. I'm never gonna throw the ball, but we're gonna sit here. In fact, give me another high five. Somebody shout, run around it. Now get back on your knees, because we're staying right here. No, you want them to release. You want them to say 1, 2, 3, go. Get on the field, and somebody goes back and launches the ball. We want to see people on the field. And although this may be my gift, God has gifted every one of you. There's no reason that our church should ever have need, because all of the needs are available here. You keep looking at me like I'm crazy. I get it. You know what blows my mind? It blows my mind when people come to me to point out the shortcomings of our ministry. Hold on, just follow me, listen. Pastor, you know, man, we called the church and we ain't got to you and everything got lost and man, we just want to make sure we can get there. You know what we need? We need some folk helping with the phones. We just lost our receptionist, she went away, and so now we're trying to figure it out. But some of y'all can do that with y'all don't even have to think about it. You sit on the phone all day. You look, in fact, wait. Some of y'all wish you was on the phone all day. You ain't got a call in 3 days, and you be looking at your phone like, I can't believe ain't nobody called me today. Right? Because there's space for you. And sometimes it don't have to be the biggest thing. Sometimes you think getting involved with the church means, oh my God, they about to give me a microphone. I'm gonna have to get up on stage. That might not be your gift. Our worship pastor will not give me a mic to sing with the choir at all. I want y'all to pray for her, because I'm not sure if she is receiving from the Spirit of God. However, some of y'all be sitting here snapping off in the car, singing all types of overtures and staccatos and running runs all over the place. And somebody asks you to sing at church, you be like, oh no, not me, I don't do that. You just sung your response. I don't do that. What are you doing? What are you doing? Help me, what are you doing? Right? And I make light of it because I don't think you see the power that's here. We keep waiting for somebody else to come. And this leads us to the last parts of the text. This is why Paul comes up and he says, now, as bad as the situation is, as bad as I'm locked up, as all the people are walking away, as you have every reason to fear, as there may be hate groups coming for you, as you know if you tell people what you really believe, it may come at a cost. He reads and he writes these words, for God has not given you a spirit of fear and timidity. But here comes our conjunction God again. I know what you're going through. I know what's in front of you, but I know your history and even the ways that your history has not been rightly taught to you, but I know the gifts that you have, some that you've let the flame go down some, but all you got to do is wake up, add a little log to the flame and just put a little wind on it, just blow on it a little bit and it'll start coming back. I remember all of it, but you ain't got to be scared. You don't have to be worried. You don't have to live in your fear. So many of us walk around and we make all decisions predicated upon fear. Now hear me. Fear is a necessary human emotion. It helps us to have longevity. It keeps us from jumping into places we don't need to jump into. It makes us think about our lives, but all of our life ain't about fear. Because then the enemy begins to use fear for control. The enemy begins to radicalize groups of individuals, making you scared to say the real thing because you're fearing you may lose your job. The enemy begins to plug in and say, don't talk about that, don't say that, or you might lose your career, a good standing in the community. There's fear to try to control what you will and won't do. And we've seen that before. That was a huge tool used in slavery. Fear. It was another tool that was used in Jim Crow. Fear. And it's the same tool that's being used right now. So you can't say or be who you want to be. But can I remind you that God didn't give you that? It says God has not given us a spirit of fear or of timidity, that we should walk away from the faith, be scared of the faith, or scared to tell others that we believe it. Oh, but God did give us something. That God gave us a spirit that is connected with power, with love, and self-discipline. Hear this. He says, I didn't give you the spirit of that, but I gave you the spirit of this. You have been given the spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. God gives us this because the human response to fear oftentimes is anger and rage. Hear it. When I'm scared and I'm put in vulnerable position, the way that I get out of that is by overemphasizing what I think I have power in. So if I can take the power position of anger and rage, I can now come out of vulnerability and begin to live in what I think is power. The problem with it is that it is false power, because just because you yell and scream, just because you rage and are angry, doesn't mean that what you're doing is right, and you wind up becoming the very thing that you are fighting against. The very same fear that you are fighting against never goes away, because now all you're trying to do is play fire with fire. But God says, I have a new way. I have a way that don't make sense. I have a way that everybody will look and call you crazy for. I have a way that looks foolish. But I want you to stand with a different type of power. So when folks are screaming and hollering, yelling, and all angry, that literally does not look like my people. Because they stand with a different type of power. This dunamis power that can blow up at any moment, but it is utilized and prescribed via love. Therefore, even the enemies of our faith, even the enemies of our own race, we cannot do the same thing to them that they do to us. Because that makes us not Christian. Because what we would stand up and do is fight power in love and discipline. So no, you can't go to the board meeting and scream and holler and yell and fuss and cuss everybody out. Because it's actually not you utilizing your power. But you do go to the board meeting. You do communicate truth. But you do it in love. Because the biggest win is not for you to become the new oppressor. The biggest win is for you to enter into a relationship of reconciliation. But how can you reconcile with the one that you're trying to oppress? This is the problem of our history in our country. Because when we don't tell it right, then we don't recognize the positions of oppression that continue to still happen. Thus, it eliminates the possibility for true reconciliation because we never got to the heart of the issue. So we keep repeating the same things over and over again, such as hate groups or white power groups or trying to get a white ethno-state. That ain't new. It's constantly coming. In fact, the great famed leader that emancipated us was trying to get a white ethno-state. Abraham Lincoln, that set the slaves free, literally was trying to make a white ethno-state. This ain't new. But if we don't know the history, then we'll act like that is good and we'll look away from all of those African Americans that said, no, we will not leave. My blood is here. My daddy's blood is here. My mama's blood is here. This is my country, and I will be the one that forces it to live into the ideals that it said it could be, because it is not the history of the country that makes it special. It's what the country set out to say it would believe. And what's crazy about it is the more that we try not to live into it, the more that it makes its actual ideals all the more poignant. So we don't give up. We don't run. We don't operate in the spirit of fear or hatred or anger, but we stand with the very power of God. We stand with it sitting there because we recognize that there's a new history. I close with this thought. One of the things that I love most is as I look over history, I see kind of repetitions and brand new things. And one of my favorite King speeches, right, is the I Have a Dream speech. It's a beautiful speech. His structure, his rhythm, his voice, his power. I mean, it rallies a country together. But King's speech comes from Prathia Hall's prayer. King, invited earlier, I think that week or that month, sits in a prayer group with some of the other civil rights leaders. Prathia Hall, one of the most powerful orators of the time, a woman, African-American preacher, begins to pray to God. Her refrain in her prayer to God is, God, I have a dream. King, sitting there, listens to this, and he's overtaken by what Prathia is praying. In the car ride on the end, on his way home, he's in the car with her. He tells her, listen, I got to take that. There's something in that thing. He picks it up and he begins to fill in some other stuff. I have a dream. I have a dream that my children will one day be able to sit on this hill with other kids just like them and not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Prathia's prayer, King's speech, led to a brand new dream. It was this one that he said that he would not live in a space where Georgia just kept sitting on the same places of injustice and all of this, but that he believed that there was a dream out there bigger than this. Prathia's prayer, King's speech, became a country's dream. And this didn't stop. It kept going over and over again. But if we don't know it, we'll constantly act like King acted by himself. We'll continually cut out the other individuals that were part of the story, that were always there from the beginning. And maybe if we saw it differently, we might fight differently. Because if we recognize that King needed a Praethia, then maybe the black church will stop acting like it doesn't need the Praethias. And we can walk in a brand new understanding of what our dream could be. We remember the past because it informs our present and it gives us a possibility of what we can look for. And this is why the Christian retelling of our story is not new. And we continue to do it because as we look at the past, it gives us something new to dream of. Praethia's prayer and King's speech that became a country's dream didn't find its inception there, but it found its inception across the seas in a whole different country. It found its inception in an era that neither Praethia or King saw. It found itself in the same place of another innocent man who was marched and put in chains, beaten for something that he did not deserve, and made to suffer a death that he could not have withstood without God alone. It was the same space that cultivated a brand new belief of people that could come together no matter Jew or Gentile or what color you were, or if you were male or female. It had the same grounds. It was the same grounds that would now use vehicles of fear and torture to try to control its populace. But God said, I'll take the very vehicle that you use for fear. I'll take the very symbol that you use for control. I'll flip it on its head, and it will be the very emblem of love that my people will wear every single day. We see a cross differently because of what he did. We got to remember the history. That if the emblem and the symbol of torture and control could be retaken and show God's love, then what can we dream for today? What don't we have possible today? Because we deal with a conjunction God. For he didn't come to give us a spirit of fear or timidity, but power, love, and self-discipline. That's my prayer for us all. Pray with me.